French. They think they can do just about anything, whether it be making bread, scamming people, or making public sites copyrighted. They even made that Suez Canal everyone was talking about as a result of a blockage that's still under investigation at the time of this recording. In fact, it would end up being the case that the completion of the construction of the Suez Canal would be that of which would assist a Frenchman by the name of Ferdinand de Lesseps. He would meet with a group of engineers in order to decide who would construct a canal in the Americas in order to assist trade. The United States had a plan to build a lock-style canal, I'll touch on that later, through Nicaragua, but France wished to build the canal through Panama. France would be voted to take on the project, in great part due to de Lesseps' ability to market the idea of a canal through Panama, claiming that such could be done in a time and cost-effective manner. The construction of the Panama Canal would begin in 1880, being similar to the Suez Canal in the sense that it would be a sea-level canal. What such a manner of construction fails to take into account, though, is the fact that Panama is not much like Egypt, where the Suez Canal was constructed. To be fair, 11,669 kilometers will do that to you. This is as such in the sense that Panama, unlike Egypt, is much more extreme and rocky than flat and sandy, with this making it so that the excavation of the land would be extremely difficult. To add on to this, the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean aren't quite at the same sea level, this making it so that if a sea level canal was constructed, there would always be a current flowing from one ocean to the other. Despite these challenges though, the Panama Canal would begin construction and only make 3 feet of progress in 2 years. I don't entirely blame them, they didn't have efficiency for enchantments back then. The great amount of clay in the grounds being excavated would also cause landslides, of which would both injure workers and jeopardize and sometimes even reverse any progress made. This would lead to France attempting to sketch out plans for a locking style canal instead. Again, I'll get to that in a bit. Even bringing out Gustave Eiffel of Eiffel Tower fame to plan out the design for the locks. Despite the Panama Canal being cancelled, the President of the United States at the time, Theodore Roosevelt, would seek to pick the project back up. He attempted to negotiate with Colombia, of whom had ownership over the land of Panama at the time. Colombia, though, would have negotiations drag, with Roosevelt's patience for the matter lowering exponentially in correlation with time. As a result of such impatience, Teddy decided to stage a coordinated revolt in 1901 with the Colombian separatists by a show of potential force, and overthrow the existing Colombian government so as to pursue the canal project, which just might be the most and least confrontational formation of a new nation ever recorded. Although there would be initial optimism for the outcome of the Panama Canal, the United States would soon face the same problems the French would, leading the project to the verge of failure, even having the chief engineer resign. Seeing such to be the case, Roosevelt would attempt to find a chief engineer with a great amount of ambition to steer the project into success. Eventually he would find a gentleman by the name of John Stevens, which I'm pretty sure is the default name a hospital gives to a baby if the parents can't think of anything. Stevens would greatly increase the efficiency of excavation of the canal by means of completing the construction of the close-by Panama Railroad and using the railroad to move ground excavated. Despite the railroad improving efficiency though, it would have no effect to the ever-present threat of landslides. In fact, there would be a point at which a surveyor/engineer would be sent down in order to observe the effects of the Panama Canal landslides in order to possibly assist in aiding in the future. This would result in the conclusion that the landslides resulted not only from shear stress of which would act on the materials making up the landslide, but also the tension in the direction of the curve of the slide. As a result of the forces being equivalent, it would be concluded that the formula presented here would be able to find the so-called constant characteristic of the material, which, due to being positive, would be substituted with b squared so that r sub y would be equal to b squared, with r sub y being a replacement for the radius of the curvature being tested. Furthermore, in order to find the form of the curve aside from a general formula, this formula would be derived twice and integrated once, with the new formula possessing the constant of integration, c, of which is indicative of the shape of the curve. In this circumstance, c is greater than 2b squared, as any other values would cause impossible shapes for the curve, such as one with an x-axis of an infinite distance, because infinity is not real. I'm not arguing with any more Buzz Lightyear stands over this, I'm sick of it. The element of the area of the curve, y dx, is also calculated using this formula, which has its integral taken in order to actually calculate the area, with the length of the curve from the horizontal being calculated with this formula. Didn't understand where any of those equations were derived from? That's because engineering documentation is meant to be read by other engineers in the same field, and not the everyday individual doomed to roam this earth without using an integral and differential equation to solve problems about landslides for their entire life, which just shows how pitiful a majority of our existences are. As a result of landslides being a constant danger to both workers and the canal's progress, Stevens believed it to be in the United States' best interest to completely change the method of canal construction and instead attempt to build a more more expensive lock canal system. A lock canal system, in principle at least, is quite simple, using gates to level out segments of water so as to allow for ships to pass through the stretch. This is achieved by opening a set of valves at the bottom of the chamber floor for a given set of locks, and either allowing for water to rush in or flow out of the section. This makes it so that the water level in the chamber and the chamber adjacent to it are the same, thus allowing for any vessel to pass through once the gates are open. This process is completed several times so as to allow for the vessel traveling through the canal to travel both uphill and downhill. The only caveat you may notice though is that with such a manner of adding and removing water from sections of the canal, there's the possibility of having the canal dry up, this being due to the fact that nearly an entire chamber of water is lost every time a trip across the canal is completed. What you fail to realize though is that there are reservoirs to the side of the canal which were constructed in its relatively recent expansion in order to prevent this very situation from occurring. Look at how dumb you look for not noticing that. How these reservoirs function is by taking a fraction of the water existing within a given chamber and storing it for later use when pumping water into a chamber. Because more reservoirs mean more fractions, it also means less water loss, but also more land required to store the water. This would then explain why there are only 3 storage units in each reservoir, with this allowing for the optimal amount of water saved with the land restrictions that exist, with this being proved by this simple equation, this being used to calculate the ratio regarding the amount of water used with and without the reservoirs, which in this case would be about 40% of the water of which would be used without the basins. Although my brain tells me that anything below 50% is bad, this number is extremely substantial when considering how much water actually flows through the canal every day. It's actually strange how fast a given chamber can fill given that there is only gravity acting on it. In fact, the time can actually be calculated by finding the work over power of the chamber. This can be found by first finding the work of the water within a chamber, calculated in part by integrating the sum of the weight of nearly infinitely small sections of the water, with the weight of a single sheet being equal to the area of the top of the chamber multiplied by the density of water, and the height each sheet would be raised, with the integral being the product of the two. The resulting value of work would then be put over the amount of power pumping the water into the chamber in order to find the time. Or you could pull out your stopwatch, but nobody ever puts me in charge of these things. With an immense amount of pressure and lack of belief in completion of the project though, Stevens would resign, with Roosevelt putting George Washington Goethals into the role of chief engineer. Goethals would be much more harsh to those laboring under him than Stevens, causing a majority of the workforce to go on strike. Rather than give in to the demands of the workers though, Goethals would replace the workers with migrant laborers. Under Goethals' harsh leadership and use of competition between those working on either set of the canal's locking gates, the canal would complete construction in a year under the projected time. What a bunch of tryhards.
You are looking at me.